Hi, it's Shona here. If you've read the email, then you know exactly why you're watching this video, so I don't have to explain anything. I'm just going to get right into it. What you want to do is have the PowerPoint that was in the email open on your screen along with this video. And if you need to pause the video right now to get the PowerPoint up on the screen, do that and I'll wait. Okay, so we're going to start with slide number 1, which is the second slide after the title slide. And it's got that picture of a fish hook on it, and it talks why openings matter. Openings matter in your speeches because you are preparing a persuasive speech. So whether your project is about getting internal support in your government department or your organization, or whether you are pitching your project to an NGO, an international aid organization, it is persuasive. And so the heart of a persuasive speech is two things, logic and emotion. And emotion is how people make decisions. I know the accountants in the room maybe don't want to hear that first. Those of you in finance, I know the Department of Finance is here always in big numbers. But it really is. People make decisions on emotion. We'll get to the logic. Don't worry about that. That's important. Therefore, if emotion is important, you want to grab people's attention immediately with an opening hook. I call it a hook because you want to hook their attention and get them excited about what's coming next. And we'll talk in a few minutes about how you do that effectively. So that's why openings matter in a persuasive speech. Why do closings matter? I call these closing hooks as well. Closings matter in a persuasive speech because you want to put a hook in someone's mind. You want a call to action. You want something so memorable about your speech, even if they remember none of the details, that they walk away from your speech thinking, oh, we have to do this. We have to fund this. We have to support this immediately. And that's why I call it a closing hook. So the opening hook hooks their attention. The closing hook hooks their heart or their mind and makes them think, I've got to do something now. What can you do for opening and closing hooks? Well, you can use the same things. I mean, obviously you'll have different approaches, but here are some of the things you can use. Next slide, slide number 3. You can use a startling question or a controversial statement. For example, one of my students recently that I was teaching was doing a presentation on cybersecurity, and he started with a startling question. He actually had 3 startling questions in his opening hook, and it went like this. How long do you think it takes for your computer systems to be compromised? 2 minutes. How long do you think it takes for an organization to figure out they've been compromised? 2 years. And then he went on, and his opening basically was less than 20 seconds, but it was so compelling that I saw the leaders he was presenting to in the audience sit forward in their seat and think, oh, you better tell us, because 2 years to detect a cyber attack, not good. I'm worried about that. So that's an example of something startling or controversial in the opening. You can do this in the ending too, but it is more effective in the opening. The ending, you could say something like, if we don't begin today, the cost is X. Are you willing to pay that price? So that's a bit of a startling question. You can also start or end with an engaging and appropriate quote or story. So a quote that has something to do with your project, your presentation, or a story. And usually you want it to be a personal story, something that's happened to you, because then the audience can relate to it. I've given you a link for one of the best received TED Talks ever in the email, and when you get a chance, go look at that person's TED Talk, because he's a wonderful storyteller, and it shows you how he links to that emotion, the emotional part of people. You can use an interesting object or a prop. So you can the beginning of your presentation, you can come out with, let's say you're talking about getting funding for portable schools or movable schools for the different provinces of Afghanistan. Come out with a children's book and say, remember reading this book in school? Maybe read a couple of pages from it and talk about how excited you were about learning how to read. That's using a prop, and it also gets people thinking about their childhood, their experience in school. It's very personal, and it's also emotional. So there's a hook again. You can start with an interesting picture or a photo, and I've given you a website here on slide number 3 called pixabay.com, where you can access all kinds of free photos and pictures about your topic. However, having said that, let me please say this, I'll emphasize this. It's best if you have photos from the thing you're talking about. So, for example, last year a group were doing a project in Bamyan province, and they were talking about how parts of Bamyan are really isolated during the winter, and they showed these huge 7-foot snowdrifts, which, being from Canada, I could relate to. But it was really what we say telegraphic. It made it instantly relatable that people who lived in this particular area were quite isolated during the winter, and winter was 7 months long. So that's an idea of an interesting photo or picture. But you're not limited to these things. Any other compelling idea you can think of for an opening or a closing hook will work as long as it's appropriate to your presentation. So in your group, with your mentors, with your coaches, with your ARPs, brainstorm some ideas that would be effective openings for the projects that you finally decide on. So let's get into some examples for the last part of our time together of effective openings and closings. Slide number 4, this is a quote that I use when I'm doing presentations to leaders about the importance of being a great speaker and how it relates to developing yourself as a leader, because a lot of the speaking training that I do with leaders is part of a leadership development program. I like this quote from James Humes, who was a speechwriter for numerous American presidents, and he said this: "Every time you have to speak, you are auditioning for leadership." In other words, people are assessing you, they're trying you out. So that's why public speaking skills are very important to leaders. And I love to start with that quote. I see the leaders sort of sitting forward and I get their attention. So it works for the presentation I'm doing. Here's another one on slide number 5 that I use, and you'll see that in this picture there are 5 dolphins leaping gracefully in a pool, and then there's this poor little horse who's madly paddling, and he doesn't look very graceful at all, does he? In fact, he looks completely out of place. This is my opening for a speech that I do on innovative entrepreneurs in organizations. I call them intrapreneurs. They're entrepreneurs inside your organization, and how often they feel like they just can't swim like everybody else. But boy, if you let them loose in an open field, they look strong, they look graceful, and they'll leave the dolphins flopping around on the ground behind them. So the idea is, think about your entrepreneurial employees. This is how they feel. Now let's talk about how you encourage them and create ways for your innovative employees to feel at home. So that's the beginning of that speech. That's why I use that hook. Slide number 6 is from one of my students. He was talking about organizational culture in his company, and he was talking about, with the knitting needles, how everything is kind of knitted together. Everybody's thoughts and dreams and ideas are knitted together in an organizational culture. And, he talked about that a little bit in his opening. And then for his closing, he pulled out a red knit scarf and put it around his neck as a way of saying, look, we're all in this together, and we help each other be successful. So it was very effective. Now, for my friends in the finance department, on slide number 7, for any of you who are in accounting or procurement and anything, and you were thinking to yourself, oh gosh, it's not going to be really emotional, or I don't have a personal story to tell about accounting. You actually do. So this is one from one of my more recent students who is a director of finance in his organization, and he had the same complaint. He said, Shona, I can't come up with a personal story, something that's going to be a great opening hook. I'm trying to give a presentation about segmented reporting. Anyway, after much brainstorming, we came up with this idea that, accounting and reporting on finances is really all taking all the puzzle pieces and putting them together into a big picture. And so we started with this analogy of a puzzle, and he told a story about when he was a little boy and his father used to bring him puzzles home and they'd do them together. And it was this beautiful story. And then at the end, I'm going to show you in a minute what his ending was that brought us all back to the beginning and his theme of puzzles, which he used throughout his presentation. So it could have been a really boring and dull presentation, and it actually wasn't, because we kept thinking about each part of the reporting being puzzle pieces. So it's effective. So Spare with me for a couple more minutes. Here's some example of closing hooks. This is a quote I use on slide number 8. A good leader leads the people from above them. A great leader leads the people from within them. And I use this quote to round out a presentation I do about leadership has to come from self-awareness and self-honesty from the heart, not just the head. You can't be telling people what to do. You will get compliance, but you will never get commitment. And this is about commitment. So that tends to work pretty well. I get good feedback on that. Slide number 9. This was the closing hook for my accountant client who started out with the puzzle bits and telling the story about his father bringing him puzzles. And at the end, he'd explain segmented reporting, and all the puzzle pieces fit beautifully together. And that's how he did his closing. Slide number 10 was from a client who managed a port in the Arabian Gulf, and he wanted to sell the leadership on making it a world-class port, and he ended not only with this beautiful visual of a liquid natural gas ship. He had these quotes that ships of exploration should not limit our destinations, they should open opportunities. Let's open opportunities for our company today. And so that's how he ended. And one more example, this presentation on slide 11 was again in the Middle East, so the country is largely desert, so he used a visual of as a desert, and he was trying to convince his leaders to change the way they approached managed maintenance in their plants. And he was an engineer, and he put this quote on top of the picture of the desert. Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change minds cannot change anything. Today, let's change our minds and change the way we operate our company. That was his closing hook. So he made it memorable, the picture related to their actual geographic setting, and he got people to think about change. So it was also very effective. So just a reminder, what have we learned today about openings and closings? Opening hooks get people's attention. They bring you in. It's not your title page with your group number, your names, and your project title. That can come after your opening hook slide or slides. You may have more than one slide. It doesn't have to be more than 10 seconds. It just has to be effective. Then tell us what your project title is and what you're doing, and get into all the things that you'll be learning in the program. Closing hooks are a call to action, the thing that hooks it in people's mind that I have to do something, I have to support something, I want to do this immediately. The closing hook is not the summary of your project. It's not your findings. It's not your conclusions. It's the very last slide that gets people thinking, I have to do this now. Thanks for your attention today. I will see you next month where we'll talk about PowerPoints. Bye.